What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pats Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. Y'all, I'm really excited about this episode. I've been talking to our guest today for a minute, trying to get this together. Truly one of the smartest, most insightful people I know in this business. Now, I'm lucky enough that I have a lot of guests who have some good insight, but this man is different. He has spent time adjusting ratings for Madden. He spent time as a pro scout in the NFL. Incredible attention to detail. So excited to dive into his perspective on the Patriots. So without further ado, everyone, Andre Weingarten, one of my good buds. Before we get into the weeds, man, how you doing? And welcome to the show. So excited to have you.
I am doing absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited to get into this. Thank you so much for having me. I know this is going to be a blast.
Hell yeah, buddy. All right, let's get right into it. So
yes,
let's talk about the Patriots offense. Whole lot of changes. The defense we'll talk about later. Way more continuity on that side.
Yes.
But on offense, we'll start at the top.
Yep.
The coaching staff, very different. Obviously, Alex Van Pelt, true offensive coordinator for the first time in his career. He's had the opportunity, but wasn't really the guy in charge of calling plays. It was never truly his offense. And obviously, you got some other additions to the staff, like Ben McAdoo, someone he worked with the Packers, who I think is going to be really good in whatever role he's in New England because of his familiarity with guys on the staff and knowing how to work with Van Pelt. T.C. McCartney, who kind of dabbled as a quarterback's coach in Denver, but now obviously was a tight ends coach with the Browns, now a quarterback's coach in New England. We'll see how that shakes out. Scott Peters for the offensive line, someone I'm really, really excited about. Wide receivers, we got a couple of guys who didn't have a ton of experience when it comes to actually coaching in the NFL. Tyler Hughes has never been a position coach in the league, but has a really interesting background on his own. Tyquan Underwood played for the Pats, was really good coaching receivers down in Pitt. Now he's the assistant wide receivers coach doing technique and stuff like that. Then Bob Bicknell for the tight ends, just so we can get all the names out there, all the big guns. So all that being said, what are some reasons for optimism with this staff? Because there are a lot of question marks. There's a ton of stuff that we could pick apart. But what are some things that you look at and say, you know what, I think this could be a pretty good unit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to like. So I think the one thing that people don't remember is that Alex Van Pelt has called plays in a game before. If you remember when Kevin Stefanski was out with COVID and he was locked in his basement against the Pittsburgh Steelers in, was it the wild card round of 2020?
Yeah.
Alex Van Pelt called the plays. Now, the script was great. The plays themselves afterwards were a little hit or miss, but he has a legitimate playoff game's worth of experience as a play caller. That's one way to get thrown into the fire for the first time. But so he has done it before. I'm sure he's learned from it, learning under Kevin Stefanski. I mean, Stefanski is one of the – I have a lot of thoughts on Stefanski in general. He is a really high attention to detail coach, and that rubs off on everybody around him. Van Pelt's very interesting. Obviously, he's worked with Aaron Rodgers. He was Rodgers' favorite in terms of his quarterback coach, I believe, period. He's talked about Rodgers does the left foot up stance, which we'll get to with Maye later. Alex Van Pelt is a really excellent teacher in that and full believes in it. And then on top of that, you have, before I get into the offensive line, Troy Brown is still on staff. He's a skill technique coach, right? I think that's going to be some really good cross-training, especially with the new kickoff rules. So I think there's going to be some overlap between the skill position and their functional movement and his experience with Tyquan Underwood. I think in general, a lot of this staff can do a lot of different things, right? If the tight ends need help, they have T.C. McCartney. If McCartney needs help with quarterbacks, Ben McAdoo, quarterback whisperer, quarterback guru. He's been that guy his entire career. The head coaching stuff was where he faltered in New York after 2 really good years scheming up that offense. So that's a veteran in the room who brings a lot of value there. I am huge on Scott Peters. Huge. So Peters, first and foremost, learned under Bill Callahan, former player. He's done a lot of things. From what I've heard, he is one of the best teachers in the sport when it comes to offensive line play. He uses Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in his training a lot, gets a lot of force, right? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of hand strikes, a lot of force in your hands. And I think that's an area that this offensive line, especially some of the now second-year players, could really benefit from, just getting some shock in their hands. And obviously, if you're working more outside zone, you don't need as much shock in your hands as you would in a power scheme, but being able to have proper hand placement, quick timing with your punch, all that stuff. I am ecstatic for Scott Peters to be in New England.
We're in the exact same page, man. Scott Peters, one, because of the pedigree, obviously. The attention to detail you also mentioned with Stefanski is one thing that jumps out when you look at the Browns offense. Like, I spoke to Bobby Peters last week, and he was mentioning how the diversity, just how effective they are with all these different run schemes. Like, it's a restaurant that has like 80 things on the menu, but none of them are really good. And you're like, all right, you're doing a lot, but you're not actually doing much. They have a diverse run game that not only is effective in all those areas, but all the things that build off of it. There's so much intention that's really exciting. And we don't know how much of that is going to carry over for Alex Van Pelt. But I am actually curious because of his background with the Packers. And I know that Drake Maye, he said when he visited, he was watching Aaron Rodgers film. So now I kind of got in my head, that actually makes a lot of sense because you got Javon Baker, has a similar skill set to like a Devontae Adams. They don't have a Jordy Nelson, but if Tyquan Thornton works out, you kind of have that vertical threat who can get you home runs. In the slot, Randall Cobb, Demario Douglas, very similar skill sets there. And then Jalen Pope, kind of like a James Jones type, where he's not super explosive, but he can win at every level and is super reliable. So what are some things that you think maybe from his Packers days that Alex Van Pelt could incorporate into this Patriots offense?
Well, I think there's a lot. I mean, first off, that's also an Elliott Wolf thing, right? You take Ron Wolf, you take Elliott Wolf. There's a lot of influence from a very successful program, right? With McAdoo, with Van Pelt, with even the scheme that Stefanski ran was very similar to what Matt LaFleur does. Obviously, it's a little bit more diverse, and he came through the Kubiak line instead of the McVay line like LaFleur did. So there's some branches, even though they all kind of root back in the Shanahan and Walsh and all that stuff. But I think you're going to see a lot of the under center, right? You're going to see a lot of the play action and obviously the left foot forward in the gun. Just looking at some of the things that the Browns did last year, they used a lot of 13 personnel, which that is a staple for them. It wasn't a huge portion of their total plays, though. They just did it more than others. They were 6th in 11 personnel percentage. So they were in 3 wide a lot. They were 4th in empty, which is something that Deshaun Watson masters in. It helps someone like Joe Flacco a little bit more. And they were also 2nd in 6 offensive line percentage. So 10% of their plays came with 6 offensive line. They loved the jumbo sets. So I think you're going to see a lot of different things in that regard. And I think the same thing that we learned from Peters, that we learned from Callahan, that we learned from Stefanski, we can apply to Van Pelt. He will put his players in the best position to succeed in their scheme. If it means that they're not going to see guys running outside zone to their side as much because they're 348 pounds, then that's probably going to be true. That the offensive line group, which I know we'll get to a little bit later, it's a very interesting group with a lot of diverse strengths. So it's a little hard to project exactly what they're going to aim for because I know that outside zone is on the menu, especially with the heavy play action emphasis and trying to move a little bit away from that gap scheme. But if they wanted to lean more into gap in certain weeks, certain situations, they can because of the interior, because of different factors that we'll get to.
And not only has Van Pelt preached this, but also his players keep repeating, and even people who just talk about Van Pelt, he puts his players in position to succeed. That can be lip service in a lot of places where you say that, but then it's like, all right, yeah, but you got a guy who's 5'8" outside the numbers half the time. Like, what are we doing here? But with Van Pelt, again, with those offenses, you do see how there's such an attention to detail in the way they deploy guys. And there's rarely a time you're looking at the tape and it's like, why would you do that? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And that's going to be way more relevant when we do get to the offensive line. But you mentioned the left foot up. You mentioned empty. These are things, obviously, Drake Maye. One thing, I think empty is going to be great for him. Like, once he really gets his accuracy down, I think that's going to be a tough formation to stop with him. And he even mentioned, I asked him about the left foot up and how the adjustment's been. And he acknowledged, it is still an adjustment. He's getting used to it. And you did see him practice. Like, the same day I asked him that, he had some passes that were behind his receivers in the quick and the short game, which was something you saw at UNC. But the downfield passing game is what you want to see. He's been good in that. And even the last OTA that we saw, this warning, this is being recorded on Monday. So there's going to be another OTA by then. But what we saw, the short stuff, like he's pumping to create windows, throwing his receivers open so many times in tight coverage. He was putting the ball where nobody else could get it. And it's like, that's it. That's what you want to see him do consistently. So when it comes to Drake Maye, he's got to fend off a very good veteran quarterback in Jacoby Brissett, someone who can play in this league. I think if he plays well, there's no real reason to take him out unless Maye is just way better behind the scenes. So from your perspective, can Maye become the starter at some point this season? Could it even be week 1? And what does he need to do to unseat Jacoby Brissett?
So, yes, to all of that, I'm very excited about Drake Maye. I think very highly of Jacoby Brissett as a leader, as a professional quarterback who can win you games in the NFL. Do I think he's a long-term option at quarterback? I don't know. He's in that fringe starter tier, and there's a bunch of guys in that tier. You might say that there's 24 true starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and that might be pushing it. And you have a bunch of guys who can be spot starters, and I think we can name a million of them. But for Drake Maye, I think the big thing is between the left foot up, which, remember, it's a shotgun only thing. So, right, in under center, you are square. So he has to establish muscle memory as a quarterback before he is on the field. Because what happens is when you try to overwrite muscle memory and then you get into a pressure situation, your body defaults to what is natural. So if the footwork and some of those things are make it or break it things for him, which I don't know, I think that's a little dramatic, but it's like, he needs to rework
too.
Right. And I think on the move, he is excellent. I think it's the static in the pocket footwork, whether it be opening up to throw to his left, to his right, just sometimes that stride length gets a little bit wide. I think the repetition is something that you need to drill in low pressure situations before you put someone out there, because otherwise they will never improve in it. It's just not happening. You don't have enough reps in practice throughout the season to keep refining it because you're going to start reverting. Mm-hmm. So, and then if you're doing that and you're thinking about your footwork as a quarterback in the NFL, you are toast. Yeah. It's there's enough to think about as a rookie with the difference in speed of play and everything. So I think those are the big things for him. Just a couple things on the left foot up. It's interesting you mentioned the quick game because it is technically a little slower to do quick game with the left foot up, but it's easier to disguise because the defensive backs are reading off of your drop. Right. So you are sliding, you're taking one extra step. So it looks like you could be going to a 3-step from the gun. Instead, you settle at 1. So you have less of a tell. Oh. So you're sacrificing a little bit of speed, but you are gaining deception, which is more important than that extra slide. So that is one of the trade-offs. It's also better to throw to your left a little bit more because you have that extra step. Your feet are underneath you a little bit better. It helps you gain better depth in your drop. So if you're going to throw a seam, if you're going to throw a deep route from gun, you get that extra step, that 4th step on a 3-step drop. So it gives you a little bit of extra time, gives you a little bit more patience to let that route develop. So there's a lot of benefits to it. It's not an end-all be-all, and there's plenty of benefit to the right foot up approach. But those are the true benefits to that left foot up approach that I have observed, read, learned about over time. So, it's a change. It's a change in a lot of ways. It's a change in your timing. It's a change in your feel. But because of all those things, you can get a lot more comfortable. So I think for Drake specifically, getting all of that footwork down to muscle memory comes first, and then we can go from there. If he is wowing everybody on the field, he's processing, he's doing all of those things, he's being the leader that we've already seen so far. Like, he's checking all of the boxes, but you don't need to rush him through that process. And, muscle memory takes a certain amount of time for everybody to develop. It varies. Some people have said it takes 2,000 reps. Some people have said it takes 5,000. Some people say it's more. It just depends on how natural the transitions are for things that he has never done before.
This is why I had you on, man. Stuff like that. I've read the press conferences. I've asked Van Pelt. I've asked Drake Maye about the left foot, and Van Pelt always says he wants it to be more like Mozart than Metallica because it is about that rhythm for him. But I had no idea, the tell. I didn't even think about that. That's really cool insight.
Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. The finals mean more on Prize Picks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else. When the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball was just getting started. With young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Breonna Taylor and Asia Wilson, you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the basketball board, and I'm taking Jaylen Brown's overs on points and rebounds because dude has been absolutely killing it. I'm also going to take Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-pointers made and Breanna Stewart for more than 25 points. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
I'm actually curious before we move off from Drake Maye, and I will say in practice, they're trying to get that muscle memory down. And it's why I can't stand when people watch these practice clips and pick apart what these guys are doing. It's like you have no idea what they're being told to do behind the scenes, like how deliberate you're supposed to be, how quickly they want it done. For Drake, I'm just like, go as slow as you need to because of exactly that. You need it to be natural because when the pressure's on, you're going to default to your habits. You're not going to rise to the occasion. Right. So I really do think it's really going to be incumbent on Drake Maye when that happens. And luckily they have a McAdoo and a Van Pelt where they've seen so much of this. They're not going to rush him out there. They're going to know, he's not there yet. We're going to take a minute. But even more than the physical, in terms of processing, I think that part of Drake Maye's game was grossly underrated, especially for a 21-year-old with 2 years of experience. There are things he does. Where is he perfect? No. But he's doing things you don't see from guys that are 5 years older than him that have been in the league for years. And he's doing them where you're just like, he's not thinking about this. This is a feel thing. So from your perspective, what kind of processor is he? And what are the things he needs to get better at? Obviously, there's going to be growing pains. He's going to make mistakes. But what are some of the big no-nos that he's got to avoid?
I think the big one, and I think we saw it with Trevor Lawrence, is, you got the big arm and you have a lot of trust in your arm. And the NFL windows are a lot tighter. And I think he experienced a little bit of that in his last season at North Carolina that he didn't experience the year before with a much better team and scheme and everything around him. I think it really is just a matter of getting a feel for what can I get away with, because that arm arrogance, as people like to say these days, right? He has it. He has it in spades, right? He can drop his arm angle. He can take his time and he can be deliberate with his motion. He can speed up his motion. The practice clips I'm watching, I'm like, wow, his motion is slower. It's more deliberate. But then you watch his film, it's like, okay, so he's just choosing to do that because he's focusing on other things, right? Like you don't know what the coaches are asking him to focus on in that moment, in that time. You're throwing a lot. You don't need to rear back and snap it like you have Aaron Donald in your face every single time if your footwork is consistent. Right? Because everything is guided by your footwork, right? It's your core, it's your weight transfer, it's your footwork. The arm is the last piece. And a lot of that, as we see with him, is quarterback avoiding windows, right? Fitting the ball into a window around players. He has the size, he has the capability that he can do that. He can drop his arm angle. He can throw left-handed. Not far, but he can throw left-handed. So like I think for him, the processing really comes down to I saw a lot of good processing from him. I was very impressed with his film. And then obviously the physical tools that even if you are a tick slow as a processor, when you have his physical tools, you make up for it. And I think something that is totally not discussed often enough is he has a center who can handle all the protections. David Andrews is one of the smartest human beings in the NFL. And if you want Drake Maye to handle protections or you want him to have fail safes and do other things, great. And that might be something that they choose to do, but you don't need to. It's not a requirement. You don't have a replacement level or a rookie center that you need to put that burden on the quarterback as well. Is it important for him to know what the protection calls are made by the center? Absolutely. Because that's how you determine who your hot is. But it's like, but does he have to be the one to say, okay, I'm going through this entire week and I need to now understand all of their fronts and all of their blitz packages as well as their back end coverage? The answer is no. Like you need to be able to recognize it, but you don't have to be right every time because the pressure is not on him in that situation.
And that reminds me of Mahomes. I know there was, I think it was on Travis Kelce's podcast where he was talking about, as a rookie, he said specifically the Patriots, they were sending blitz packages at him. He's like, I didn't know what to do. I'm just like, everybody just do your job. Because he had no idea, and it forced him to have to learn how to figure all that stuff out. But like you said, it's a lot to put on a rookie's plate already. He did handle some of his protections in college, so you have to think, okay, it's a good starting point, but obviously very different in the league. And also, you mentioned how he can speed up his arm. again, that's why it's so frustrating when people say, oh, it's so slow, because I've seen him have a rusher bearing down on him, and you think there are times, like I think 2 or 3 times I saw where that windup did kind of get to him when he got strip sacked, but way more often than not, you're seeing that thing come out way faster than you think, because most of the time it's like, all right, he's kind of just doing his thing, but it's like, oh, he's about to get hit. Oh, wow, it's out. He's fine. So I agree, man. I think the processing, there is going to be things that every rookie has to get over, but I feel like he's starting in a much higher place than people do give credit for. But he is still a rookie quarterback. And it helps any rookie quarterback to have a strong run game. Now, Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, I feel like are the kind of 1-2 punch this team needed. Like Zeke, he was nice in theory, and he did as much as he could, and I don't want to credit what he did, because the amount that he took on once Mondre got hurt was incredible. But it was pretty obvious once he got signed and they were doing all the pony stuff with 2 backs. It's like, can he do this? Yes. Do you really want him running all these routes? Not really. Antonio Gibson is not that. He's like a freak athlete where he's almost Mondre's size, but he's more explosive. He's quicker. He's a more dynamic mover. And that's where I think you really can move him outside in the slot and give him an actual route tree and let him attack downfield. But also in the run game, I think he didn't get to show it as much later in his career at Washington, but I think in this wide zone scheme, he's a great fit, and Mondre can pretty much do anything. So with the backs in mind, we're not really going to talk about the depth, guys. We have no idea what that's going to look like. But that, if those backs and also the offensive line they have, if, say, we have Chuks Okorafor at left tackle, left guard Sidney So, center David Andrews, right guard either Nick Leverett or Layden Robinson, and then right tackle Mike Nwenu. Is this a run game that you think can take over a lot of the load so that whether it's Drake or Jacoby, they don't have to be the guy necessarily, and they can rely on that run game to handle a lot of the difficulties?
Yeah, I mean, so sort of. I think that's the best way I can put that. I have concerns. So I think the big thing is that your best wide zone player would have been Cole Strange. From a weight perspective, from everything. I don't know exactly how far he's out. I know he's going to be missing time into the season, but whether he plays this year or not, they have to figure that other spot out, right? Like that's just what it is. I would describe Ramondre and Gibson as rock solid but unspectacular, right? Like they are dependable players. Gibson scares me a little bit. He has a ton of potential, but he fumbles a lot. That is something that he has had his trouble with his entire career. His vision has been inconsistent, and part of that is reps. Part of that is the scheme that he's been playing in. If you're asking him to just find space, he can do it. And I think that he is a better fit in this type of system where he's running more wide zone, where he's running more outside. And yes, excellent receiver. Like as your receiving back, he is better than what Zeke is as a receiver, not necessarily pass protection, but as a receiver. He's better than what Ty Montgomery has been, and Ty has definitely flashed in years past that he could do certain things. So it's not like that role is the same, but he's probably closer to end-of-career James White than anyone else has been since his departure. So from that perspective, I like the 2 backs, and obviously the whole discussion is what is the tipping point of great versus replacement level at running back. And I think they are well above the replacement level, but they're not special. Right. Either one of them. As a duo, they can be useful. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to be good in the NFL without a passing threat. Just, you're going to load up the boxes. You're going to do all of those things. The Browns, for all of the good that they had with their scheme and everything, they were still 26th in yards per carry and 30th in time of possession per drive. It's really hard. And they ran the ball a lot. They had the 4th most attempts in football, but they weren't as effective because Jerome Ford is not Nick Chubb. The offensive line was in shambles, right?
Hot take there.
Hot take. Yes, I know. So like the drop off was dramatic. And I think that's something that at a point, the running back has to take over the game, but there has to be enough respect of the passing game. So I don't think the run game by itself can carry the offense, but if it's humming and they refine the technique of these players, I think there's something there, because I'm huge on Sidney So based on what I watched. He shows some really good potential. I think he can really seal. He's good enough in space. He's not a special mover in space, but he can do that. He needs some seasoning. He's a leaner in pass pro. but he's a good overall run blocker. I thought out of the group, he was probably the third best both zone and power blocker on the team last year. I think
after Andrews.
Yeah. And I mean, Andrews is about as good of a power scheme blocker as you're going to get at center. I mean, that dude is a wrestler, and he really will just put guys down. The double teams between those two were really impressive, and they really created big opportunities that some of the other guys really just didn't capitalize on. Okorafor is an outside zone guy. He is a zone blocker. He spent 75% of his time in Pittsburgh in a zone blocking scheme. He's better on the front side of zone because he is pretty decent of an athlete in space. He has solid movement skills. He stays decently under control, but his grip strength is really not good. So you don't want him using his leg drive to try and displace somebody. You want him on the move and doing that. And you want him on the front side because on the back side, he is just, whether it be reaction or short area quickness, he's not good enough to cut those guys off consistently. So it's actually a pretty decent fit because on Onwenu, you can do a lot of different things with him. And he was excellent on inside zone at tackle, right? He was good at sealing. He's, sometimes you leave that end of the line guy unblocked anyway, right? So you have some options there. And yeah, I mean, I don't love the other options at right guard that you mentioned. There are two guys who I don't think I've actually watched in a long time. I assume that means that Mafe is not in the running for that spot at the moment.
He is. He has been. He's taking snaps at center, and he has been involved at guard. But like you talk about the hand fighting and how much Scott Peters is going to help, I just got to believe it. I see it before I can believe it because that's the big thing with him. It felt like he was playing with his hands closed all the time.
Yes.
And I'm just like, dude, like you are so strong. Use your fingers, like latch on.
Hands closed outside the shoulders.
Yes. So he's in the running. So what do you feel about him? Because he is one where his fit is awkward, but he does have talent. So I shouldn't completely write him off.
Yeah, I think he does show some things. I don't think he's a good mover. So he's more of your gap scheme interior guy, which as a guard, you can kind of live with depending on what it is. Like I wouldn't want him pulling. I would want City pulling to Onwenu's side from left to right. I think that's something that you could do. As a drive blocker, I think he has the core strength and the leg strength to drive guys, but because he's not a particularly good mover and because his punch was weak, he really struggled in both phases. But I think if you get those hands a little bit tighter, you're going to get there because in a phone booth, he can work on those double teams. You're just not going to get him climbing with a high hit rate at that second level. So, and you have to live with that. Some of the other guys on roster, Jake Andrews, from what I saw from preseason, he was good on double teams, right? Smart player. He was sturdy versus nose tackles. That's his wrestling background. He can get some movement and plays with good awareness, but he's kind of sawed off. His range is kind of limited. I don't know if that's good enough to play guard. It's definitely good as a successive center whenever that happens. If he, depending on how that competition works out. Right. And then Michael Jordan, I've watched him for years. He's definitely a better fit in the zone blocking scheme. His movement skills were not highly touted, but we can work in space. His pass pro has in the past been a disaster. So I think that's something that needs to be figured out. But if you want to maybe put him as a sixth lineman on the end of a line, you could theoretically do something with that. But my ideal with Cole Strange would be Okorafor, Strange, David Andrews, Onwenu. Without, maybe Andrews at right guard, Jake Andrews.
He did get a little bit of run at guard late last season.
Yeah, exactly. And a little bit in the preseason. Is Caden Wallace a guard or a tackle? He's a refined pass protector for what he is. I don't know if I trust him on an island necessarily, but if you reduce his splits a little bit, he's big. He can do some things. From everything I saw, his technique was pretty strong. So, maybe that's a guy who could compete for that right guard spot. I can't imagine. What you say, Leverett and who else was the
right guard? Is probably Leverett and Layden Robinson.
Yeah, that That would be one of
Layden. I feel like Layden's probably my favorite to start if you had to pick somebody, because I do like his upside, but that's just me. Yeah,
I mean, we're kind of talking like bottom 10, bottom 5 right guard situation in the league, if that's where we end up at. But that's a problem. But one quick thing, Patriots are one of those teams that has an assistant offensive line coach. And in the past, the way they handle it, they have a coach for the starters and they have a coach for the backups. That's a huge deal because development is very hard in the NFL. It's almost impossible. Almost impossible. It's why so many people go to outside people for that help at quarterback, at all sorts of positions. It's why Duke Manyweather is so highly touted, because he really works with these guys in a way that teams don't have the time to. So if you have someone like, was it Aaron Kugler?
Robert Kugler,
Robert Kugler, Kugler. That is a tremendous asset to a team to have an assistant offensive line coach who can work with these young guys, teach them everything that Scott Peters is doing with the starters, and help prepare them up that pipeline with live reps.
And I'm curious, when you bring that up, so when the Patriots took Caden Wallace, a big thing, I wanted them to take Kingsley Suamataia. I felt like he was the kind of guy where, like, yes, that could be your franchise left tackle.
Right.
But they continued this trend from the past couple of years where they go with guys who have a lot of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was a sign that they kind of want guys who they can coach up pretty quickly, where you've seen a lot. So really it's more of a technique thing. And once you get that down, it'll snap in, versus not only do I have to teach you technique, but you're going to be seeing stuff you've never seen before. And with so little practice time, it's really tough for those guys to truly reach their potential. So do you think that's maybe one of the reasons the Patriots have leaned more towards experience with like a Caden Wallace and someone like a Kingsley, who neither guy is probably going to start as a rookie, but you kind of think that Caden with his experience has a higher chance of contributing or sooner than maybe a Kingsley?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's the case. And I think the other thing is, from what I've gathered, Caden Wallace was a Scott Peters pick.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. They kind of have some optimism with it.
It's like, I think he's earned enough equity in the league to be like, if Brian Callahan or Jeff Stoutland or Scott Peters says, that's the guy I want, I have a really high grade on him. Okay, cool. we can't afford to miss him. Okay. Jordan Mailata was that guy with Jeff Stoutland, right? Like he saw that potential with him, and that was his pick. Howie knew that he had someone who could develop him, and they took that time and they did that. If you're going to put a developmental player, one way or the other, Scott Peters and this top offensive line group is the type of group that I would expect to be able to do that. For all we know, Caden Wallace could end up being the starter at left tackle by the end of the season, depending on what happens with Chucks, because he's always been kind of your swing, more right tackle than left tackle in terms of quality, especially as a pass blocker, in my opinion, just from what I've seen technique-wise. So it's like, Wallace was a right tackle as well, wasn't he?
He was a right tackle, but he did say that was really because obviously they had Olu on the left side, but he said in practice he did get reps. So he has some experience, but not extensive.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that cross-training is valuable, and having a swing tackle that you can trust is fantastic. But nonetheless, it's like either way, you're going to have someone who is maybe more experienced on the opposite side, who's playing left tackle. There's a lot of challenges there.
That was the most offensive line talk I think I've had on any of these shows that didn't have Brandon Thorne, and I'm here for it. That was fun.
The NBA Finals are finally here, and if I have any chance at all to find tickets to a game, it's probably going to be through Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Getting through the Game Time app is super easy, and I really like their user interface. All you have to do is go to the game or event that you want to attend, go through the venue to see where you want to sit relative to the action. Then you can actually get a panoramic view of your seat, so you'll know exactly what to expect once you get your ticket. Game Time is also great for those weekends where you're not really sure what you want to do with your night, because you can just scroll through, look at flash deals, zone deals, or last-minute tickets, and find a plan to spend the rest of your day or evening. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, now let's get into something a little more tangible, all right? This Patriots wide receiver core. This is a group I'm higher on than a lot of other people. I feel like they're being written off because they've been so bad historically. The way I see it, they've got solid veterans. Like Kendrick Bourne, I'll be honest, I don't know if he's going to start the season. Like there was a video of him running, and I'm looking and thinking he might need a little bit more time, and that's fine. They have KJ Osborne. So they have someone like him. They have Demario Douglas, who are at least two guys where you pretty much, KJ Osborne's going to be solid. Demario Douglas is someone I think he's kind of pointing up. Tyquan Thornton and Jalen Reagor as your, veteran X's, not great. But then the way I see it, you have Javon Baker and Jalen Polk, two guys who Polk probably sooner than Baker, but I think both those guys can be significant contributors. And if they are, I think you're talking about a much improved passing game that people are going to have to take seriously. And if you have Drake Maye, Baker, Polk, and Demario Douglas all growing together and getting that chemistry with, I don't know if you saw the video where Drake's talking with Polk and Baker about how he wants to run, where it's like, that's the kind of stuff you want to see where they're in constant communication and they're getting that chemistry. I feel like it really is a group that can surprise. And then at tight end, Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, solid, especially Hunter Henry, red zone monster. Like that's really what he's there for, and it's a chain mover. Hooper doesn't get a lot of acclaim, and I don't think he deserves like a ton of, you don't have to get excited necessarily, but he's solid. He's a good receiver. I think better than he got to show in Vegas. He's a good enough run blocker. And Jaheim Bell, again, I think these young guys, we're talking in 3 years, I think this is a group that's going to be pretty intimidating because he's got rare athleticism, which as we know with tight ends, that's a pretty good indicator for success.
Yes.
So how do you feel about this receiving core yourself? Again, I gave my thoughts on it, but I'm not trying to talk into an echo chamber, and I know you're going to tell it to me straight. So how you seeing this?
I think you left out a name. I know he might be considered a bubble player, but Juju Smith-Schuster is still on the roster.
I honestly am guilty. I constantly forget, and he did say he was 100%, to be fair. Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing with this group is that it's going to come down to a lot of scheme. Because I think as these guys are developing and they're playing, I think your play time is going to be determined by your effort, especially in the run game. I think
Polk, I think, is going to be a starter real quick.
Polk, Bourne, Juju, we know all three of them can do it, right? Like that is something that they have established. Pop is small, but willingness is important. Really, that is your baseline. I've seen guys who are 6'5", 240 who aren't willing to run block. And
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to cut you off. Just because I recently watched this because I wanted to know if they were going to let him. I watched how they used Elijah Moore. It was a lot of like RPOs, like he's not really at the play, or they'd even put him outside. So I'm not sure they're going to make him run block a lot. I'm sorry. That's it.
Right. Yeah, I think you can see a lot of things. Based on personnel and based on experience, I wouldn't be surprised to see them doing some Robert Woods types things, digging out with Polk, crack blocking on toss to that side, front side play, that sort of stuff. I think from a scheme perspective, getting open, I think some of them are better than others, right? But I think play action is your ticket. And I think play action, working over the middle of the field, you have very savvy veterans in Douglas, Bourne, Juju, and you have depth with all three of them. You have Osborne as well, who has some foot speed. He might not necessarily be the true field stretcher, but he can scoot. He's been used as a vertical threat at times in Minnesota. There is something there. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the group. There's not one player who can take over a game. And that is a scary proposition because in the NFL, everyone's dinged up. And you sometimes just need someone who can just do that. I think that's going to come down to Van Pelt. I think it's going to come down to the play action game, the timing, the consistency of all these guys. If they make a trade for a wide receiver at some point, which they have all the cap space in the world to do so, that is a decision. But I really like this wide receiver group next year.
Yeah.
This year, I think there's going to be some growing pains. But you're going to see the flashes, right? Baker is just a spectacular catch monster. He just does rare things down the sideline, body control on the sidelines. over the middle of the field, right? You have some real tough guys. And then you have guys who can sit down in zone, and the league is predominantly zone. But another factor is if you start incorporating with Drake Maye read option, even a little bit, you're going to see that man coverage number go down even a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't turn your back on a quarterback who can move like he can. And he's wiggly on top of everything else. You want to do some of those RPOs where you have that read option with the built-in bubbles on outside of that. Like, you can do some things and you can start stretching more horizontally that you could not do in years past, both from an arm perspective and from an athleticism perspective. So there's a lot of creative elements that can really be, entrenched into this group. And then I agree with you. Hunter Henry to me is the most consistent player on the offensive group, period.
Yep.
And I think the only person to me who could challenge that would be like David Andrews, right? I'm talking like a full offense group. I think Hunter Henry is the most consistent, where he can just go out there. He can find a soft spot in zone. He can make those catches in the red zone. He can set up a DB. He can set up a linebacker with a stick. Like, he's that guy. It really comes down to him staying healthy, and it comes down to whatever that depth situation looks like. But again, if you're going to be running a lot of 11 personnel, then, the backup tight ends aren't as necessary, and you can kind of bring them along more slowly. And then obviously you have more coaches with cross training, which is something that New England has done forever, right? McCartney, tight ends coach, right? Having a second guy, you can really play it by ear and say, hey, I'm watching these guys and I see something here. And then you can collaborate, for a group that seems like ego is not as big of a portion of their identity, that people are a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more collaborative right now. I think that's something that's really impressive that could continue to be built up. So
another guy in that group, Bob Bicknell. I remember he had one of the most fascinating resumes. He's coached like almost everything. It's like receivers, backs, like he's been all over the place. That's another really fun one where, and even like McAdoo, like those guys just have experience coaching so many different things and working with so many different groups. It is going to be interesting to see how they collaborate. One last thing for the receivers. What do you think is the ceiling for Javon Baker? Because he's someone I like to get different opinions, because I think he could be like mid to low tier wide receiver one. I think if he really becomes a consistent route runner where it's not a lot of wasted movement and it's just like every route is crisp, I think that's where he gets dangerous. Because I think, one, he's got the hands to win even if he's covered, but I think he can separate just fine and has just enough juice to be that kind of like Amari Cooper, like Devontae Adams kind of deep threat where they're not burning you necessarily, but if they get a step on you, they're behind you and you're going to have to catch up and get them from behind. So do you see him as being able to be like that X for this team, or do you think maybe they should still long-term try to get a true wide receiver one?
I think that really just depends on what his development looks like, because obviously he has the pedigree, right? He was at the big school. And things didn't work out there for one reason or another, and he transferred, but the talent is there. It's why it seems silly in retrospect, but Al Davis was enamored with 5 stars prospects. You see a guy falling in the draft, well, he was a 5-star once upon a time, he's clearly talented. Can we extract that? He is clearly talented. He is the master of his own ceiling in this situation. I think he could absolutely get up to a mid-tier one, as a ceiling. And I don't think that is, because right when you discuss ceiling, it's like, well, what could they become? And it's not like, how likely is that? I don't think it's unreasonable to think that he in 3 years could be a guy that you look at and you say, okay, that's a good X receiver in this league. That he's a starter. He's a $10 to $15 million a year under current market.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to be somewhere in the billions by the time that he gets into this contract.
Right. But I don't think that's out of the question. And I think you have someone like Jalen Polk. Obviously, the Robert Woods comparisons are through the roof. Someone who I really, really like and just enjoyed watching when I watched Michael Penix, when I watched those Washington players. I mean, you have two guys who, in a really good wide receiver class, have a ton of potential.
I agree. And then you mentioned the 5 stars. That was the Patriots' MO too. If you used to be a 5-star and nobody wants you anymore, we'll give you a shot. And it makes a lot of sense. If you believe in your coaching staff, then take a shot on talent. Like, Jalen Reagor, sometimes it doesn't work out, but also sometimes it does. All right. It's been an offensive heavy show. It's been an offensive heavy offseason. Patriots took 7 offensive players out of 8 in the draft. But this defense needs to get some more attention because with all the predictions about New England's record, I understand people thinking they're not going to do super well, but this is also a defense that kept them in almost every single game last season. We're talking the Saints, the Cowboys, and then the real end of that Miami game in Miami, but that's a house of horrors. You never really expect them to win those.
Colts, Giants.
Giants as well. But I do think this is one where they're going to keep them at least to the point where they can get the ball last, and then we'll see how things go. So do you think that this defensive staff is equipped to build on the unit's performance from last season? Because losing Belichick obviously is huge. He always gives you an edge. But they still have Gerard Mayo. They still have DeMarcus Covington. They still have Brian Belichick, Mike Pellegrino. Like, there's still a lot of guys who are already on the staff. But the question is, can they take a step forward and evolve? Or do you think maybe we will see a step down in production from these guys?
Were you stealing my notes? Because I wrote all that down. So, at least the continuity and the key spots part. And, so
we've been having too much in common, man. You got to dog one of my takes at some point.
So I think before we get to the defense real quick, Belichick's influence was more than just defense, right? Mm-hmm. He was one of the best game planners, period, because he knew what both sides were doing from both perspectives, and his feel is unmatched, right, at that spot. And I think that's going to be an area that Gerard Mayo is going to have to, he kind of got pushed into the deep end a little bit, and now, you have to swim. And, there are people, confidants that he can lean on, and people that he trusts, whether it be even someone as easy as his former teammate, Dante Hightower, now the inside linebackers coach, right? Someone who was in the trenches with him and discussed in those meeting rooms for so many years together, right? Like there are a lot of people and continuity there that they can share the way that they think and really come up with solutions. Now, they're a very talented group, just in general, right? They were one of probably the top 5 defenses in football last year. And that was with all of the injuries, right? You're without Christian Gonzalez. You're without Jonathan Jones for half the year, without Marcus Jones. You're without Matthew Judon. Everybody else was dinged up. It's a huge deal. So getting those guys back, I think, is going to be really big for them, because I think that helps change your personnel a little bit. I know that they love Miles Bryant. I know he's no longer on the team. He was playing and he was punching above his weight class at a lot of times, especially with his foot speed, with the amount of man coverage that they like to play. So, he fought his tail off, and there's a lot of respect there. But the guys that they might have in this role have more juice than him. And that's a big change. So I think the personnel is stronger. I think it's more seasoned. And I think the game planning will take a step back. I think we could probably get to a net neutral with a potential for a little plus minus there. Just a little. I would not expect a tremendous variance if all stays healthy. I know the schedule is absolutely brutal. But I think it really just comes down to how good is Gerard Mayo at game planning, right? Mm-hmm. And what that game feel comes like. And it might take a little bit of time, or he could be sensational because, we don't really know how involved he was on a day-to-day basis with that play calling, with that game planning. Obviously he was involved, but it's the same way that, by title, everyone was very fluid, right? Whether it wasn't he listed as defensive coordinator once upon a time, like one season, and Steve Belichick was?
I don't think he ever had the title. I know they tried to give it to, who was the Bucs coach? Came over for like a hot minute. Schiano. I know that he was supposed to be the defense coordinator, then he left, and it basically fell to Mayo and Steve Belichick. I think the way it ran most recently was that Mayo was like running meetings, and I think he was doing a lot of the game planning. Right. But I think that Steve was the one who was doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff is how.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then Bill was the one who was kind of running the show at the end of the day. Yeah. So, I would expect a little bit of variance. I think there's going to be some growing pains. So here's another thing that's just something to keep in mind. Do you remember 2 years ago when the Jaguars hired, I'm trying to remember who the defensive coordinator was. He was with the Buccaneers. He was under Todd Bowles.
Yes. I can't remember his name, but I know what you're talking about.
So when he was brought over, if you watch the first half of their season, it is a disaster because they are outgapped consistently. They're out leveraged in the passing game. They're asking a lot of things. What happens is you have a coach who is in a first-time position to now start calling plays to run that show, and they have all these ideas in their head that they want to try out, and some of them are good and some of them are really bad. So, the learning curve sometimes takes a bit of time. Mm-hmm. And in the second half of that season, they completely righted the ship. I mean, there was literally a play where Foye Oluokun was aligned on the opposite side of the center, having to guard Austin Eckler on a free release. Or it was a tight end. It was Gerald Everett on a free flexed out, and he had to go all the way.
Center?
Yes. Like he was overshifted to the opposite side. I'm like, this is literally, there's not a single quarterback in the league. There's not a single wide receiver in the league who couldn't complete this pass and get 20 yards out of it. And so like that sort of thing happens, right? So it just depends on where that line gets crossed of, okay, let's slow down. Let's just be a little bit more regimented, conservative. We can throw an idea here or there, but it has to really be strong to be put into the game plan.
So how much confidence does it give you? Because Mayo has been saying that he wants to give players more ownership. Like you are in charge of the defense. I can only do so much. You're on the field. It's on you. With the amount of continuity and veteran leadership they have, like Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar, those guys, they know what they're doing. Jawan Bentley, one of the guys that always gets them in line. Jelani Tobias, Sione Takitaki, like the linebackers are really smart guys who have a ton of flexibility and knowledge. And then in the front, you have Godchaw, Barmore, Wise, Judon, guys who can just communicate really well and know what they're doing. Even someone like Keon White, who's kind of stepping into more of a leadership role, according to Mayo. Does that give you more confidence that they will be able to execute on the field? Because they may be trying stuff, but at the end of the day, if it's a critical situation, it's going to be on Bentley and Peppers or Duggar or whomever to be like, all right, we're doing this because we've been together for years. We know how this is going to work. John Jones, I don't want to discount him either. Right. And there are young guys like a Gonzalez, but really, for the most part, there's really guys who've been in the league for a while and have already seen a lot of offense.
Yes, absolutely. I think communication is the most important in the red zone, right? You see the most busts from as all different types of quality of players when it comes to the red zone because you have so many communications and calls. So I think that's something that I love that there's more ownership there. I think there's a lot of credence to it. We have to see it first because one of the things is that like Belichick could tell you if they do this. And like he could predict that because he saw so much of it. And you can make those checks in the real-time situation and it works. If there's more ownership on the players, there are some really smart guys on that defense. But you have to do it very quickly. There has to be the continuity. So that should help, but they might be slightly less prepared for a situation because you don't have the greatest defensive coach of all time in your ear throughout the week, drilling you on things that you'll never expect to happen. And then the situation comes up. So I think that's really valuable. The communication, because they do a lot of brackets. They do a lot of passing off, even in man coverage, right? They do the whole replace stuff.
True zone when they're in the red zone. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, just in general, right? They do whole replace on underneath routes where the linebacker will carry and the corner will replace as that whole defender. Like they do a lot of that type of stuff. We saw it against Kansas City many times. It's what slowed down Tyreek Hill, et cetera. So there's a lot of communication that happens on the back end. I think that is something that's going to have to continue. I think they have the people to do it.
When you mentioned the communication in the red zone, the first thing that came to mind was last year when KC had that ridiculous play where they like had this crazy shift where like 3 players moved, and you see the defense where like when Peppers looks like he's panicking, you know you got him, and it's just one of those where it's like, all right, you've never seen it before. There's only so much you can do. I think they like burned Alex Sauce, I'm like, poor guy. Like he never stood a chance.
1938, Navy film. Why aren't you studying that, Alex? Come on.
Right. Oh, Belichick, you weren't prepped on your 30s defense. Come on, man. But yeah, that's an outstanding point. Yeah. All right. So another thing this defense has talked about is that they do want to have more of an emphasis on the pass rush. They want to get after the quarterback and also generate more turnovers. Now, one thing that Christian Barmore may have let slip, I asked him about Jerry Montgomery, and he was talking about all the things he's doing and kind of brought up 4-man fronts. Now, we know the Patriots are always multiple, but they are mostly an odd front defense. Yes. Like they'll get into their even fronts, but they really like to live in that 5-man front scheme. what changes if they do want to get more turnovers, be better in the pass rush, which obviously getting Judon back and maybe a better Joshua Uche will help. But how do you foresee them maybe making some changes to ensure that? Was there anything you saw in the scheme where you were like, this would probably help them a lot if they were trying to get after the quarterback more consistently?
Well, it's a silly thought just in general, but having Jelani Tavai on the line is not maybe your best pass rush plan. That is a run defense. It's part of why their run defense was so good, because they weren't really a traditional out front. They were the 3-3-5,
right?
And whether you want to call it 3-3-5 or a 5-1-5, whatever you want to call it, it was 5 down linemen in there with linebacker overhang, someone who is a hybrid, and 1 backer behind instead of 2, right? Like that was what they based out of. They played some traditional base defense. It was probably more in the red zone. But, I think part of the thing that we're going to see more of is you can do a lot of zone blitzing out of those looks. So you can do overloads. And you can do a lot of creative things that maybe are a little less Belichickian, for lack of a better term. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that you can do out of a 5-man front or an even front. Even front is a little bit more attacking gaps, right? Mm-hmm. That is kind of the difference. When you're in a 3-3-5, whether you're 2 gapping in certain roles or you're gap and a half, you're reading and reacting. You are not attacking. They were a run defense first front with coverage on the back end. And that was really what they emphasized, which is why their run defense was so strong. So I think the big thing is that a more attacking mindset probably will produce better results in some areas. I think we've seen it over the years with these speed rushers, that setting the edge, contain rushing, that sort of thing has been a huge deal for New England forever, right? It's why some guys didn't necessarily pan out that draft nicks, myself included, thought should be better pass rushers, or they flashed. I think Chase Winovich is an example of that it was just, he was not as stout at the point of attack as they needed to get him on the field consistently. I know there's other things there, but
literally Joshua Uche asked him, like, what was the reason why you kind of had a fall off last year, and very diplomatically and very respectfully pretty much said, the scheme was not really helping me. I asked him, was it scheme related? He said, yeah. I was like, oh, well, do you think this year it'll help? Or do you think you'll be better in this defense? And he's like, oh, yeah, like confidently. Yeah. So it's that exact thing where when you're asking Josh Uche to contain, he's not going to be Josh Uche. But if you take him off the hook and you let him be 2022 Josh Uche and pin his ears back, that's when you get the guy who's like producing like crazy and being super efficient.
Right. And I think having the counterpart plus having better coverage, right? Coverage and pass rush, they're tethered. If you can't cover, you're not getting home. If you're not getting home, you can only cover for so long. Right? Like that's just what it is. And I think the other thing is that, you had some more traditional run stoppers inside, and I think the front can be a little bit more varied. Like Keon White played 49% of the snaps this past year. He played about 100 in an inside 3-tech role, and most of those were in 4-man fronts. More of their dime looks, right? They're clear pass rush situations. So I think you can do some stuff there. You might be able to stunt, slant, because both he and Barmore are very athletic. Like you can do a lot of different things, creative things, when you have the personnel that New England does, because so many of them are hybrids. If you need to ask a Josh Uche to drop, you can do that. If you need a Sione Takitaki to set a hard edge, to play off-ball linebacker, to rush occasionally, he has experience. Tavai, same thing. Judon, he can drop into coverage. It's good. We saw in Los Angeles, Michael Hoyt, who is listed at over 300 pounds, played edge all year, and he dropped 200 some odd times. It's a scheme thing, right? Yeah. Yeah, because they were a 3-3-5, and they sent 4, and they put him on the edge. He's listed at 310. He was probably closer to about 290, but that's Keon White's role, what he was last year, right? Like, you just need someone who can mess with protection when you are in those fronts. 4-man fronts are a little bit more straightforward. You have to rely more on stunts and twists up front, but that's why the 3-4, the odd fronts, they're so popular, right? Because you can do the zone blitzes, you can do the overloads, you can do all sorts of things much more easily, but you can attack much more easily from a 4-man front. So, I think there's a good team has a mixture of both. I think Cincinnati's been a good example of it, that they are a traditional 4-man front, but they do a lot where they would put Jermaine Pratt as a 5th man on the line as kind of a jack role, and he would either rush or he would drop, and they would send pressure from the slot. Like, you can do some inverted stuff, really screw with protections when you get into those fronts. So I think New England is well equipped to do those things. It just is a matter of how much they want to do.
For sure. I'm also curious, before we get off the defensive line, what would a solid year 2 jump for Keion White look like for you? Because one thing, I feel like we mentioned the communication and all the different stunts and everything. I feel like with another year in this system, and it sounds like he's really taking on a leadership role with the young guys especially, if he can get some chemistry with like a Barmore or whomever, and they can just kind of have that chemistry where with Barmore, he can be the looper and still get, he can get home, or he can be the penetrator and do that. Yes. And they both have that ability. So what would it look like if Keion White kind of grew into his own more?
I think it really just, the pressure numbers have to go up a little bit more consistently. It's pressure for the interior is really hard, because what their job is to push the pocket and make the quarterback uncomfortable. Their job is not necessarily to get sacks. If they get them, fantastic. So I think it's a little bit of tape. It's a little bit more of how many stops is he getting? Where does he fit? If he can play 60% of the snaps instead of 49, I think that's a win, because that means that he has earned that equity with the coaching staff, that he is in condition, that he is productive, and that you have someone out there when you have an Armand Watts in the wings, you have Gotchow at nose tackle, you have Dietrich Wise still in the group, and then you would bring in O'Shane Ziminis, and you have Taki and Tavai on the edge. He can do a lot of things, but if he earns that right to keep playing, that means that he is doing something right. So I think the amount of time that we see him on the field is going to determine how successful the season is, barring injury.
Right.
Production, it's hard. When you do gap and a half stuff, you get no credit for it. Yeah. But you are clogging lanes, right? Gap and a half, right? You are controlling a gap you're reading, but you're squeezing it with your back to the opposite gap. So you are basically 2-gapping, but you're in a strong position to rip and get into the gap that you're primarily associated with. So that is a read and react defense that is really, really, really hard to get any credit for, but it's one of the most important things in the game. So, I think he has that in him. And he has the flexibility to just do a lot.
Everything you mentioned about why the interior is so hard is why I thought Barmore should have been a legitimate Pro Bowl or All-Pro candidate.
Yes.
Because you're talking about he's about as productive, if not more, than a lot of the other guys. But it's look what he's being asked to do. This is not someone who's running up field. This is someone who's controlling people all the time and still making these crazy flash plays and getting the sacks. Yeah. It's no, none of this is easy. It's all earned.
Yeah, and a lot of his big pass rush production comes in those 4-man fronts and in those penetrating roles as a 3-tech. But his run defense has taken a huge jump. Right. Yeah. That was the area that was a little bit rough for him. It was why sometimes he wasn't always on the field. And he has grown so much in his short career already that it's he earned his payday. He earned the recognition that New England fans gave him that he probably should have gotten a little bit more nationally.
We could do a whole episode on Christian Barmore. But we're going to wrap up the defense with some cornerback talk. Now, Christian Gonzalez, defensive rookie of the month. Have we seen everything we got to see from him? Does he have a lot more to prove? Of course. But this wasn't somebody who walked in and it was necessarily surprising what he did. I would say he kind of met the high expectations that were set on him, where it's this guy's a freak. He's got everything you want, and he's smart. He should be able to handle some really tough assignments early on, and he did. So I feel like he's locked in as your cornerback one, barring whatever. Jonathan Jones, as solid as they come, one of the toughest SOPs in the NFL. He's either going to be outside, inside for you. We'll determine based on your answer to this question. Who do you think emerges as a third corner for this team? You got Alex Saucin and Isaiah Bolden as young guys with a lot of physical skill and promise. Marco Wilson, he's been in the league for a while, but I will say since he's been with the Patriots, he's looked competitive, physical. You like what you see. He may not be necessarily a long-term starter, but a guy who gives you at the very least, I think, good depth. And obviously Marcus Jones, frankly, I see him as more of a bonus. If he's healthy, that's fantastic. But after 2 season-ending injuries, I'm sorry. I can't really get excited about him, especially last summer he did struggle. So it's is he outside? Is he inside? There's so much put on that star role, especially where it's like, sure, do you want him outside where he's outmanned because he's too small, or inside where he has all these responsibilities, but he has barely been on the field? How's he going to respond? So who do you think emerges as that third corner? Is Jonathan Jones going to be in the slot? Is he outside? What's going on there in your opinion?
I have a cheap answer.
Okay.
I think it's one of the safeties. I think Marcus Jones probably should have the inside position because of his lateral quickness. But as a team, they love deploying 3 safeties more than they enjoy deploying 3 corners. I think the Ravens model showed that is possible because even though Kyle Hamilton, lots of praise, excellent overhang defender, the man coverage is not a strength. He can run when he has his leverage, but he will get crossed across his face. And he has the support from very good linebackers and other safeties and scheme and pressure and all that stuff. So I think there is a path forward for one of the 3 safeties from last year, whether it be Mapu, Duggar, or Peppers, to be the guy that you see more in the slot. And they all played slot roles last year. I think Peppers had something like 250 overhang / slot snaps. Duggar had like 180. I think that's what you're going to get because Jalen Hawkins, who is kind of taking that Cody Davis type role as where he is a really good special teamer, he has experience 2 seasons ago being a primary free safety. So you have someone with experience, kind of like an Adrian Phillips at basically the same point in his career.
Yeah.
Who can go back there and play if you need him to. He still had 120-ish free safety snaps last year, even though he was primary special teams in Atlanta because Jesse Bates was there, because Richie Grant, they both were healthy all year. But I think that's who we're going to see because I don't feel entirely inspired by the rest of that group to play that nickel role. I think it's too difficult. I don't think it benefits Jonathan Jones at this stage in his career with declined lateral quickness to be put in such a disadvantageous position. Okay. I think he has played outside of that role for so long that putting him back in there would be more of a stopgap than a positive because he's good against higher level wide receivers. Right. And you're going to have enough situations where there's reduced splits where he has to do things that a slot would do anyway. But having him inside full time and having him at 5'9" in the run fit is a problem. And that's where it comes down to it. If New England still believes that stopping the run is a priority first, which you would venture would be the case with the people on that staff, right? Gerard Mayo being a linebacker and having, that background, you want a bigger body who can move. Peppers, to me, is probably the best equipped to do it because it's one, the role he played at Michigan, that he has not played in his entire NFL career until he came to New England at different points, and he thrived in it. It was the role that he was best at. And now he has experience being a rotational player. You can do the low to high rotation. You can do the high to low rotation into the nickel. There's so many different possibilities. To me, I think if we're going best player for the role, because of how important the role is, Jabril Peppers would be my number one. And then a rotation of Mapu and Duggar based on personnel and assignment would be that if Mapu is that guy, which I liked him a lot from what I saw at Sacramento State. There's things I saw last year that I liked. He was in over his head a little bit at times, but, he was asked to do a lot more than he was in college.
That's what I don't think people understood. They keep like, is he a safety? And it's like, no, he is their third safety, which in New England makes you a part-time starter. Like that dude was drinking through a fire hose. And against Miami, you saw him at free, you saw him at linebacker, you saw him at the drop safety, you saw him in the slot. Like it was pretty early on. I'm like, yeah, he's not doing great, but I can't imagine what's going on in this poor kid's head because they're giving him everything. Like it's like, all right, Adrian Phillips, you're barely on the team anymore. Mapu's taking your spot. I am curious though, because I think the Patriots, one thing with Jabril Peppers, I think they maximized him because they understood you don't want him in man coverage. Like the Giants, I know for one game had him against Cooper Kupp in the slot man coverage. I'm like, what kind of galaxy brain shit is this where you are taking this guy who's very talented, but like cornerbacks can't do what you're asking him to do. And they said, you know what? In these zone schemes on early downs in our big nickel packages, that's where you see Duggar. That's where you see Peppers because they're basically playing the flat. You don't see them having to cover guys man to man. And that's where they thrive because they can also blitz. And that's where you get a lot of the run stops. Like Jennings and Peppers Most of their run stops came on the same play where those Peppers blitzes and then Jennings knifes inside, and then there's stuff you can do about it. So in man coverage situations, who comes onto the field? Because that's where you think it's probably going to be like Mapu in the box, Duggar as that like McCourty type robber role, and then Peppers deep. So who's going to be in man coverage, and is Jonathan Jones going to move around at that point?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried making a move for somebody, because I just don't trust the body types outside of Marcus Jones, right? You have bigger guys, longer guys who are there. I mean, I have not watched, I can say this honestly, I have not watched a single snap of Caleb Ford Dement. He is the only person who, to me, has the size profile of a nickel. Because I've seen Sean Wade, I've seen Marco Wilson, I've seen these guys, and you need to be such a reactive athlete, a short strider reactive athlete in that role. And that's not who they are, right? They're a little leggy one way or another. They have good long speed, or, but that's why Marcus Jones fits, because he is a jitterbug. And Jonathan Jones, even though he's not tall, is not necessarily a short strider. He's kind of like a medium length guy. I would never describe his short area quickness as his best attribute. I think it was always his long speed, his intelligence, his ball skills and stuff like that, despite being smaller. So, it's tough. I think Marcus Jones makes sense. If you could play Marcus Bryant out there for so many snaps last year, I think you can put him there. I think if you have to put Jonathan Jones in the nickel, I wouldn't call it ideal, but I think Marco seems like a pretty good fourth corner, third outside. He and Sean Wade probably would compete for that spot. Alex Austin's in the mix. I want to see Isaiah Bolden. I think he's a pure special teamer right now, but I would love to see him on the field and see what he can do because of his length, because of his size, speed, profile. But I mean, that's a guy who, to me, is taking what Matthew Slater's roster spot was. I think that he is an elite special team caliber prospect for you, if nothing else. Right. So, I don't know if Marcus Jones can be the guy, but he might be the guy by attrition.
I've really just had John Jones pegged as a slot for so long, and now this is messing with my depth chart. I might have to move some stuff around, but that was a really fantastic point. Now, buddy, I've had you for so long already. We're going to wrap this up, but before I let you out of here, what's your record prediction for this team? How do you think they're going to do? You can do a ceiling or a floor if that's a little bit easier, because I know there's so many ranges with this team where they could go. If you have one record you're confident in, you can go with that.
Yeah. Okay. The record I'm confident in is 6-11, which is not necessarily the best, but it's also with the assumption that they take Drake slowly.
Right.
And I think that's the right approach. I think this entire staff has a lot of leeway to it. As long as you show growth and there's reason behind it, as long as there's not pressure from up above to throw him into the fire early, I think that's where we're going to be at. If they make a trade or two, if they get that wide receiver one, that guy who's a clear dominant one, I think that ceiling bumps up a couple games. I would describe a true dominant wide receiver one, whether you consider a Higgins, an Ayuk, a Samuel, whatever it is in this scheme, as that. I think that they're a 2-war player above what they have right now, and you give more time to develop the younger guys. But I think their ceiling is probably 9 wins. I think everything has to go right. I think there has to be some key injuries on opposing teams, and they need to grow up quick. And if that's the case, I think 9 wins is a discussion. I think they could be in contention going into week 17 when, they have Buffalo and Miami right back to back. Is that the end of the season, or is it's Buffalo and somebody?
It's I think the last 4 are the Bills, the Chargers, the Cardinals, and the Bills.
I know that they played the Bills twice in succession at the end. It looks like it is Cardinals, Bills, Chargers, Bills.
Okay. I had the team, just the order was a little funky.
Yeah, you nailed it though. I think they could be in contention heading into that second Bills matchup. I think they could steal one from Buffalo. I think because they play Miami in New England early and Miami late, they could steal one of those, especially with all the dynamic stuff they do on defense. I'm still not sold on Miami's defense. There's a lot of stuff there. The Chargers are a total question mark.
Yeah.
They should be more disciplined as a team, but whether that translates to wins is yet to be seen. Arizona should be better. It's a make or break year for most of that team, including Kyler. So I think that's definitely going to be a discussion piece. But yeah, one other thought. Jabril Peppers picked off Josh Allen in a curl flat this season.
Yes, he did. I remember that one. That was
he baited the flat, took the curl on a flood concept.
Yeah. They baited Allen twice, too. Alex Austin had the one when they were in Buffalo where apparently I think Pellegrino told him it was coming. Yeah. I was looking at the play. I'm like, there's no way he knew this. That was just crazy instincts, but it turned out he knew exactly what was coming. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm not as high on Buffalo this year. I think it's Miami's division with Jets as a sleeper, and Buffalo needs to prove that they can rally back. Because when they fired offensive coordinator.
Oh my God. Dorsey?
Yes,
Dorsey?
Ken Dorsey. When they fired him, they slowly declined in production. Diggs declined in production, and Josh Allen took a lot more hits because Dorsey specifically, the thing that he worked on was protecting Josh Allen from hits. And as soon as Joe Brady took over, Josh Allen was getting clobbered on the quarterback runs and all that stuff because it was the most effective play. And Dorsey's like, this is our franchise quarterback. We want to protect him long term. We'll see how they go into year 2 with Joe Brady and all of those guys, but that roster has declined. So if you want an optimistic view, I think New England could be competing for the 7 seed going into that Week 18 matchup. I think it's more likely they're closer to 6 wins, but if Drake May blows the staff away and someone takes a step at wide receiver, whatever it is, whether it be health or anything, that they can be a dependable target. I think 9 wins is within reach, especially with this defense.
We are on the same page to a sickening degree. I think in my initial record prediction, I had them with like 10, which is optimistic. And even now I'm like, yeah, 10's for sure pushing it. And I totally acknowledge that. But I do think if the young offensive players are guys that it's like, okay, they're surprising. This is like, they're guys you have to take seriously. That's where I think they start sneaking into playoff contention. I'm giving the Bills a division out of respect, right. Until you knock off the king, you have to give. But I completely agree. Like, I'm not super confident in the Dolphins anyway, because I like Tua, but I think he is what he is at this point. You can surround him with much talent, but I just think in those crucial moments where everything just gets so much tighter, I feel like his play style doesn't suit that. He
doesn't have a margin for error. It is very similar to Brock Purdy in San Francisco, where both Shanahan and McDaniel, they run the ship. Yep. They are playing Madden with their quarterback. And it was what McVay did with Goff, right? Like all 3 of those guys have a formula that they control it. And even LaFleur to some extent with Jordan Love, which is part of the reason that they drafted Jordan Love, because Rodgers wouldn't play ball with that in 2019. If you watch that film back, it's rough from not throwing to open guys because of who they were and situations like that. So yeah, Jimmy Graham wide open like half of the snaps and just nothing. So, but I think you're right. I think that's the exact type of situation in Miami where when Tua is the one who needs to make the play when you're behind the sticks. When you have that situation, I don't think he has the arm. No. I don't think they have the protection. I don't think he has the arm. And the playmakers are small. They're not going to win those contested catches consistently. And what they're going to do, right? Because the protection, the routes that they can run become a little bit more limited, and you can bait those throws. You can sit on those routes. And because his arm isn't good, it's a bottom 6 arm in the league. You get into those trouble just based on NGS pass velocity. Bottom 5, bottom 6. It was in the same tier as Mac Jones and Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts. And so
okay, so we talked about the division. I'm sorry, I got to let you go, but quick, what do you think about the Jets? Real quick.
Excellent defense, excellent scheme. They go as far as Rodgers goes. I don't trust their wide receiving core beyond Garrett Wilson for year 1. Their offensive line is experienced, but not as a unit. And there are a lot of injury question marks. And I don't know if Rodgers can handle moving out of the pocket anymore. I wonder if we're going to see the way that Peyton turtled at the end of his career, not 2015, not fall apart because his arm was gone, but I can't afford to take this hit.
Yeah.
2013, 2014 Peyton Manning. I feel like that's something that could happen. Their floor should be 8 games if Rodgers is healthy the whole season.
For sure.
Their defense is really good, but they have holes, right? They do. Just schematically, their safeties aren't strong. Their linebackers can be picked on in coverage. Their pass rush might not be as potent this year, right? They replaced Bryce Huff with Hassan Reddick. Reddick still is not attending OTAs. He's getting a little bit older. We'll see what happens there. John Franklin Myers is no longer on the squad. So they're depending on...
I really like him.
Right. So they're depending on Michael Clemens, who's more of a run stopper. They're depending on McDonald. They're depending on Reddick, Quinnen owning everything, which he already does. They should still be a top 5-6 defense because of scheme, because of Sauce Gardner. But, they can be attacked because both Michael Carter and DJ Reed are very small. Yeah. So, they can make plays if you are late, but they're not winning at the catch point. Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. And Gardner can be beat a few times. Kendrick Bourne got him a few times. A few different people, because he's so long and so lanky with reduced splits, he really has to overcommit to the outside stuff. If he's playing hard inside leverage, he's not going to give up inside, and that's really the place you can weaken him. So if you reduce the splits and you push him stem outside, cut inside, you can do that. And it's where he gave up most of his receptions and most of his problems, and then some stuff working down the stem. But yeah. So long story short, the Jets should be pretty good. Mm-hmm. And for New England, if the kicker situation works out and the defense does what it did, that raises the floor. Mm. And that's all you can ask. The defense does not have a single player that I would deem below replacement level as a key contributor. The offense has a few, and they don't have anybody that I would deem as a star. Yep. And that's tough. It's good to not have replacement level players, right? Buffalo did that where they didn't have a ton of star power for a few years, but they had a bunch of really consistent guys, but they had no one below that replacement level. And that's what carried them through the early Josh Allen years. Then you get Stephon Diggs, you start Allen elevates, Hyde elevates because of his experience with Poyer. Edmonds becomes rangy, even if he wasn't consistent. Milano grows because of the role he's in, right? And then you start getting those guys. So, you set that floor and you prevent those busts and those negative plays. Even if you're not getting the huge positives, the opposing team will start getting negatives, right? If you can limit mistakes.
The mistakes, like last year, man, so many games where they were so close. It's just like, don't shoot yourself in the foot and you'll be fine. But the division's up for grabs. This is a team that has a range of different outcomes, but it's going to be exciting to see one way or the other. Andre, thank you so much for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it. Finally going to get you out of here. So appreciate your time, my man. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Now, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.
Peace.